So first off, I was just wondering, with no MLS team or MLS academy to promote soccer in St. Louis when you were growing up, like there is now, how did you get introduced to the sport?
Um, I blame that on my uncles. I blame that on my family, my dad, my parents, and it was just something that from a young age I always had a ball at my feet. I actually attribute my being left-footed to my uncles who only allowed me to kick a ball with my left when I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. So yeah, it was obviously family for sure. And then my dad was a was a coach at WashU when I was younger, and so seeing and being at their training sessions and their practices, it was just a natural for me to be there and watch them and want to be older because I thought at the time like they were the best of the best because I didn't know any better, right? I was 7 years old, I think, at the time. And so, yeah, that's how I got into it. And just always wanting to play, always wanting to be outside with a ball. And yeah, it's one of those things that it was in kind of in the family. And that's how I got into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That seems like that really was the key, especially in the early days of the MLS and early days of of soccer really taking this next step was just having those family ties. I've noticed that from many players who've shared their stories. How big of an impact do you think St. Louis City SC will have on the city and on the community?
Um, no, I think it's huge. When you talk about soccer cities, it's one of the originals, right? And I know there's always this debate on what's the capital, right? What's the soccer capital of the U.S. And I think it's a little bit naive to still say that it's one kind of area. It's one city. I think historically, of course, St. Louis is a big player in that, but um, I think for the community as a whole, for the soccer community is huge, right? And I've said this in other interviews, is that for families to be able to take time out of their weekend and all go to a game, for moms to take their sons or their daughters, for dads to make the walk with either the supporters or with all the other fans. I didn't get that, right, and I didn't have that, and I think that's important for the young kids and the young players to be able to have that, to have an MLS team, a first team, a professional team to look up to, and so I think first and foremost, it's downtown, which is fantastic, right? They're building up more of the area. There's more plans in place, but I think just the outreach within not just the soccer community, but the kind of the inner city part,
Yeah.
to kind of bring the sport to make it accessible to more kids and more people, I think is something that they're really gonna be a part of and be focused on going forward. So I think as a whole, it'll be great for the city, for the people that live further out, and for the ones who are right there next to living right next door to the stadium.
That's awesome. Yeah, actually, when you were talking about that, it kind of reminded me of when I hear like about Gio Reyna and Christian Pulisic's like upbringing. They talk about spending time in England and really seeing sort of the soccer culture,
Yep.
come in
It's
at a
it's
young age and influence them.
yeah,
And
it's a
so,
huge influence. It's a
yeah,
huge influence, and to not have that, to then having that, is just like
yeah,
eye opening, right?
yep.
And I think it'll be great for the kids, without a doubt, whether they're already in an academy or whether they're new to the game. I think it'll be a fantastic opportunity to have a team right in their backyard.
Yeah. Awesome. Is there a specific moment for you that sticks out for like when you think of St. Louis as a soccer culture, soccer city? When is there a moment in your life where you're just like, oh yeah, that I feel that soccer culture here in St. Louis at all?
Um, I'd say I couldn't even pinpoint exactly the year or the team or what it even was. There was a U.S. national team game,
Yeah.
a men's team. They were played at the time. It was Soccer Park. Now it's whatever it is down there for the St. Louis Scott Gallagher club. They run it, but the national team came and played in a stadium, and I loosely say stadium, it was like, 5 or 6,000 maximum seats,
Yeah.
maximum capacity. And that's like one that sticks out to me. And going to the game and seeing like, okay, these are professionals. This is like this is a team that's representing us as a country, and that for me sticks out, from my childhood,
Wow.
memories of watching games.
Can you ever imagine now being on the national team playing in front of only 5,000 people in that stadium? I feel like
No,
that's such a massive change.
no, I can't, to be honest with you. And you know what, especially in it is such a massive change, right? And I thought, at the time, like, wow, this is a huge crowd. And then you get into high school, and listen, high school soccer in St. Louis is just, it's a different level compared to
Really?
a lot of places in the country. You're getting, some high schools are getting 2, 3, 4,000 fans at games, when they're going
Oh,
through.
wow.
Yeah. When they're into the kind of the state cup kind of, quarterfinal, semifinal, final, you're getting pretty big crowds. So, yeah, I was exposed to that from a teenager, but I mean, I couldn't imagine. But at the time, I think that was a big crowd. I don't think anybody was really, listen, everybody, the people who liked soccer liked it, but it wasn't, they didn't need 20,000 seat stadium to have a game. It just wasn't at that level yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I can't, yeah. Growing up, I just
It's
can't
crazy. I know.
fathom that was
That's
where
crazy.
they played back then. Um, who do you think is going to be St. Louis's biggest rival?
Ooh, man, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it'll depend on who you ask. For
Yeah.
sure. I think you obviously have there's a natural rivalry with Chicago, right? St. Louis sports, Chicago sports.
Yeah, that's where I grew up. So I was thinking
Okay,
that as
so
well.
you know exactly
Yep.
what that is.
Yep.
I think that's natural, but I think in terms of, and nothing against Chicago, nothing against the fire and that, but I think
Mhm.
with the way kind of Kansas City
Yeah.
overtook,
Mhm.
the soccer scene,
Yep.
from St. Louis over the past probably 5 to 10 years, with them having, obviously they've had the MLS team for a long, long time, but the success of the Kansas City team over the past 5 to 10 years is what I mean by overtaking and overshadowing St. Louis. I think it'll be Kansas City, personally,
Yeah.
but I think if Chicago gets their act together,
Yeah.
it could be a pretty competitive Midwest, with Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean that sounds like a storyline there because I'm imagining St. Louis wants to take that soccer culture back in a
Of
way,
course,
it can be handled on the field in that way.
of
And then
course,
they also have the advantage of them being in the same conference, whereas Chicago, it's kind of that weird splitting line there.
yeah,
St. Louis and Chicago is the splitting line between the conferences. So,
yeah,
um, man, that's yeah, it gives me a lot to think about in terms of the storyline for that rivalry moving forward. As Charlotte is doing the same thing, Charlotte FC has been doing the same thing, trying to figure out how they're like those different storylines play out
yeah,
geographically. You've always struck me as a really resilient player, pushing through adversity, even when sometimes maybe in the public eye, that maybe have overlooked you at times. I think even leading up to the 2022 World Cup, as I mean, obviously, as an outsider, it's different than what the conversations happening inside, around the team and stuff. But um, being and I feel like you've always pushed through those moments and overcome and achieved. Like the 2022 World Cup, I think is just such a remarkable accomplishment for the team as a whole, and then also for you personally, just getting to see you perform at that level. I think for me and a lot of fans in the U.S. was really just a fantastic experience. Do you associate that resiliency to St. Louis at all, and the culture and the community?
yeah, I'd say a little bit. I think part of it is upbringing. Part of it is being humble enough to know that you're never the best player,
Yeah.
but you're never the worst either, and you're never as bad as someone says you are, but you're never as good as you think you are. And so, yeah, I think being from St. Louis. Listen, even though there were lots of guys coming out, every year there was one guy at least coming out and turning professional and playing in MLS.
Yeah.
But I think from a young age, and I was listen, I wasn't developed. I was young. I was slight. I was small. I didn't mature the way some people did. So I was always overlooked in a lot of ways until probably I got to sophomore or junior year in high school. And so I just always learned and was taught, like, yes, you're a good player, but there's always going to be someone that's going to be better than you. And for me, that's always stuck with me, is that like, in order to kind of improve and continue to grow as a person, as a player, you have to learn. And you have to, you have to learn with the ups, you have to learn with the downs, you have to, ride the roller coaster. And that's not just soccer. That's, that's life, and so, yeah, I think that's can definitely be traced back to my family and the I say it's cutthroat. I don't know that cutthroat is probably the right word, because we were so young, and it is just youth soccer, but there were so many good players in St. Louis at the time, and so many players that other people were talking about, and it was like, for me, it didn't bother me, but I always knew that, like, okay, like I can be better than him. It's just how am I going to get there? And so I attribute it definitely back to that, but also just having a mental toughness, and understanding when things aren't going well, that it's not the end of the world. It's you can learn from it and grow from it. And yeah, I think that's been the biggest thing for me. And something that I've figured out much later in my career, and realized that I've been doing it for a long time without acknowledging it.
Yeah. Speaking of acknowledging your career, I heard a rumor, and this is before I think the World Cup, around the same time the World Cup team got announced, that when y'all played Man City, I know this is a personal conversation, so I don't know if you feel willing to answer it, but there's a rumor that Pep, after the game, told you, like, if you were 24, not 34, you'd be playing for me. Was that something that happened?
Yeah, and I gave him a smart ass comment. I don't know if I can say that, but
It's all good. Yeah.
so, yeah, I gave him a smart ass comment. I said, well, that's a shame, because I'm not 34, I'm 35. Which after I shook his hand and walked away, I was like, well, all right, we'll go with it. Why not? But yeah, no, it was true. And it's I sat there on the bus on the way home, and I was like, holy cow, like, that is, coming from him.
Yeah.
And I thought, God, why am I not 24?
Yeah.
I thought about coming home and checking my birth certificate, but I knew it was right, so there was no point in worrying about it. But yeah, no, it was a real conversation. And that's one of those that, like, when you go through a career and you have many different, achievements and conversations with people and different managers, and for him to pull me aside and have that thought, and have that, just to tell me that was, I mean, it'll go down as one of the coolest things for me personally, because it's Pep, right? It's Pep Guardiola. He's probably one of the best manager in the world, and so yeah, it was a pretty cool exchange, and something that nobody, and people have questioned whether it was true, but it is 100% true. Nobody can take that away from me, and that's that's pretty neat.
That's awesome. And I mean, you're one of the pioneers, Tim, right? I mean, because of the work that you've put in, and other, your other teammates on the national team, the 24-year-old won't get overlooked by Pep, in the future, right? Like that player will get picked up by Pep next time, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, like, another thing to take away from it, is, like, you set the foundation, like, you're the whole group of players that you all. I mean, I think the way y'all represented 2022 World Cup was just, I mean, you set the foundation for a lot of players coming up.
Well, and I think that's the cool part, right? And part of me wishes, oh, like, why is it that defenders and especially center backs figure things out, later on? Well, it's just because it's a different part of the game. But
Yeah.
I think the coolest part of going, and obviously that situation happened a week before we left for the World Cup. So imagine that conversation happening, and I'm going into the World Cup on an absolute like high, right?
Ooh.
Even though we've lost
Yeah.
to City and we've lost to United the last 2 games, it's like, holy cow.
Yeah.
But I think the coolest thing was coming back from the World Cup, and the amount of people that I've talked to, the amount of guys in the Fulham changing room who grab you and you're like, whoa, like your team is like, we didn't realize how good you were. And like, that was so we wanted to go further, don't get me wrong, but like our goal was to make people realize that this country, like our team, the players that we have, they're good players.
Yep.
And we did that. And now it's about taking that next step. And like you said, hopefully now these teams, these big clubs, they've started to come around, right? Some guys are playing at bigger clubs, but I think more and more, you hope that they start taking that 24, the 23, 22-year-old, and giving them a shot.
Yep, definitely. I think the Netherlands game specifically, actually, even though it was the loss, really highlighted the growth in the team, just because the amount of sort of change the Netherlands, the strategy and the change they took to approach that game was like, hey, we actually like, it was an acknowledgement of this team is capable of beating us in this way, and so we have to not let them counter or play the style that had gotten y'all to that point, in terms of using your speed, using your pace, and countering and things like that, and really trying to take that away from you guys. I think there's like a big acknowledgement. It's like, hey, there's a way that they can beat us, and we have to, like, we can't just beat them straight up. We have to try to work around and find other weaknesses to y'all's game, which I think is a huge. I don't think that was something that necessarily was acknowledged by teams in the past.
Yeah, I think it was a respect thing.
Yeah.
I think it was. I think personally, I do feel that had they gone and played their normal way, it would have been a closer game in terms of scoreline for sure. But it was surprising, right? That all of a sudden they're sitting and playing counterattacking football, and that's not them.
No. Yeah.
And so, I wouldn't say that it caught us off guard, but at the same time, we did discuss it. It's like, that was them giving us a lot of respect, in that sense. Unfortunately, they played it perfect, and beat us. And again, in knockout games, like that's all that matters is who wins, who scores the most. It's not about getting through the group stage anymore. It's results, and fair play to them, because they gave us the respect, but at the same time they played it perfect and moved on.
Yep. All right, one last question, and then I feel like I'm probably taking up too much of your time.
No problem.
You've been on Fulham for a while. They've bounced around a lot, up to Premier League, down to Championship. How does it feel this year? Y'all are near the top of the table, like up top half of the table. Like, so, how does it feel to be like in a way more stable position in the Premier League? And it seems like y'all have, like, I actually wrote an article about Marco Silva in Estoril, his time in Estoril, a little bit, history of that club. How is it working with him, and just sort of having this more stable position for like one of the first times in your time in Fulham?
Yeah, it's a little bit surreal, to be honest with you, but at the same time, we're not really surprised, because we know with the group that we had last year, and then the kind of the pieces that we've added this year, it's a lot of good players. There's a lot of good characters, a lot of good like personalities, and I've said it in other interviews, is that with Marco, he brings an enjoyment to the game. He brings an enjoyment to training, but also he set his standards very high in the very beginning, and demands that we perform. that we do what we need to do, and we do what's asked, and that trickles down and translates to the players then putting the demands on ourselves and then putting the demands on each other. And it's just been, like I said, it's been a little bit surreal, a little bit disappointed, because we feel like other results, some of the last minute losses that we've had, United, City, some of the Newcastle as well in the last minute a few weeks ago. So we feel like we could be better off, which is even crazier to think. But I think we're just taking it a game at a time, and at the end of it, we'll see what happens, right? We'll see where we are, but it's been so much fun, and I think that's the biggest thing that Marco is making sure that we're playing with a smile on our face and just enjoying the football, enjoying the games, enjoying the work, enjoying the tough times as well as the good times, because it's all part of the the season and the roller coaster.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Tim. I really
No
appreciate
problem.
you taking all the time to speak with me today. I'm really looking forward to clipping this up and putting some of this in the show for next week. And good luck with the rest of your season.
Perfect. Thank
Really
you very
looking forward to
much.
watching you play the rest of the way. So
I appreciate it.
awesome. Thanks, Tim.
All right, Brian.
Bye.
See ya.